Hello and welcome to week 4 of Sweater Weather Knit Along. We are in sunny Bracebridge today and it looks a lot like late August, not early November. So I hope wherever you are, the weather is as good as it is here or even better. And today we're going to focus on necklines, picking up stitches, changes to the final neckband, and also the proper sequence for seaming your garments. And for those of you who have not joined us for the Sweater Weather Knit Along during the previous 3 weeks, a quick recap to describe the sweaters that we've chosen are starting with our first option. We chose the PJ pullover. It's a very, very easy knit, straight up construction, seamed at the sides, seamed at the shoulders, and the sleeves have that really simple shape with the balloon at the cuff. The balloon cuff is popular this year, and that is knit with a strand of kid mohair and silk together with a strand of cotton merino. So that is PJ pullover. Option number 2 was our Keeper of the Woods, very popular one. Lots of people chose it in different shades of natural undyed llama with merino. And that one has a nice oversized fit with the drop shoulder sleeve, straight shoulders, no shaping, and the crew neck. And of course the pine tree at the front and 2 at the back. Option number 3 was a real fan favorite, as you can see why. This is our Italian lace sweater, and it is knit in a chunky version of the natural llama and merino, undyed. So this is the cream color, and then we also have it in light fawn and darker fawn. Just a beautiful plush natural yarn where you can still feel the lanolin from the animal. And then option number 3B is the one I'm wearing, ranunculus. And it is knit from the top down, circular needles, and it has the balloon sleeves, has a really deep, deep raglan shaping, and it can be cropped or a little bit longer. This one I think I've added 2 inches to the body length, and I did not add any length to the sleeves. So that's where we're at today. I have talked to a couple of our knit-alongers this week. They came in for a short little chat, and one of them is almost finished her sleeves on option number 3, and she's ready to do the final neckband and piece it together. And then today we had a knit-alonger in who is doing option number 3 in the darker fawn shade, and she has finished back and front, and she's ready to start on her sleeves. So everybody is making good progress, and I know some of you may have just started in the last week or 2, so don't feel any pressure. It's not a contest. It is supposed to be relaxing and fun. And today we have Sandy with us again. She's monitoring comments and questions, so please feel free to check in, send her a hello or a wave, and let us know where you're watching us from. Maybe you're sitting outside or at the beach. Do we have any hellos?
Yeah, Debra and Lorna have said hello.
Hi Lorna, and hi Debra. So what I will do is go through each pattern with neckline options, and if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. If you're watching the video later tonight or on the weekend, you can always post your questions in our events page or at the bottom of the video, and I can answer them anytime. So yes, PJ pullover. So you have options for the round neck. If you do not like the flat crew neck, you can convert that easily to a ribbed neck with a little bit of a roll. To do that, you would still follow the directions for the neckline, picking up the correct number of stitches, working in knit 2 purl 2 ribbing on a circular needle. But instead of casting off, you would continue with 4 rounds of knitting. What that does is just create a nice little roll neck, and it gives a very soft finish, not as severe as just casting off and ribbing. So that is one option. You could also convert it to a turtleneck, which a few of our knitters have. Traditionally, a turtleneck would be about 8 to 9 inches length. So what you would do is choose a smaller needle size than what's required for the crew neck. So go down one size in your needle, circular of course, and then knit up halfway. So if you want a 9-inch turtleneck, that means you knit 4.5 inches on the smaller circular in the ribbing. And then the final half, the next 4.5 inches, you would knit one size up needle. The reason that we do that for a turtleneck is so that the under layer sits close to the body, and then the fold back layer has a bit of a softer, a little bit more volume. So it's not tight against the neck, it's sticking away from the neck. So a turtleneck would suit this style because of the soft drape. Okay, so I think that is all for PJ pullover. Crew neck, roll neck, or turtleneck. The option is yours. And then next up we have Keeper of the Woods. We have had a few knit-alongers asking about how they can change the neckline, maybe bring it up closer to the bottom of the actual neck. So for that one, option number 1 is you can add more rounds of the ribbing. That's quite easy to do. This has about 7 rounds. It's a very simple crew neck, but you could increase that maybe to 10 rounds. That will fill in this space that maybe you're not comfortable with across the shoulders and around the front of the neck area. Option number 2 is to go down one size needle, but not for the start of the neckband. So maybe do 5 rounds on the required size of needle, and then for the final few rounds go to the smaller size. What that does is just draw it in very, very slightly in all directions. So that would bring it in probably a 1/2 inch closer to the neck in all directions. But you have to remember too that when you're casting off, that has to be done looser than your normal knitting. And it's always important to cast off in the pattern stitch. So in this case you'd be casting off knit 2, purl 2, ribbing, knit 2, purl 2, ribbing, and this one as well. So those are 2 ways to improve the sizing of the neckline. Hi Anne, thanks for tuning in. I wonder what the weather's like where you are.
It says it's 18 degrees.
Oh wow, I think you have us beat by 1 degree, but we're catching up. This weekend, by Sunday, we'll probably be at 19 or 20 degrees. And then the neckline options for our Italian lace sweater. Some of you are not a fan of the high stand-up collar. You may find that it's a little bit too hot indoors, or maybe even itchy as it touches underneath the chin area. So that can be reduced to about a 1-inch crew neck and then cast off. It can also have the 1-inch crew neck with 4 rounds of knitting and then cast off. That will create that pretty little roll edge. And we do have one knit-alonger who might not be watching us today because she's outside, but she is going to knit 1 inch of the ribbing, cast off, and then she's going to knit a separate cowl. Same number of stitches, but she will knit it separate and wear it when she wants to go outside and have a warmer neck area. The only change we're making to this pattern for the neckline is in the instructions it will ask you to sew one shoulder seam, leave the other shoulder seam open, pick up stitches on a straight needle. There's no reason to do that because then you have an unsightly seam on one side of the neckband. So what we are changing is we're going to sew both shoulder seams, and then we're going to use a circular needle, pick up all the stitches and work the ribbing in the round. Okay, so that's the only change to this neckline to make it more efficient and more professional looking. What I wanted to mention too, maybe I'll just go through the last option. So ranunculus, well, unfortunately you've done the neckband at the very beginning because it's knit top down. So you would have had to make any changes to the height of the neckband or the style in the beginning. Sometimes though I find if a neckband is too wide, this one is reaching its limits. It's a little wide, but I find it's okay. You can always add a row of single crochet and that will draw it in, and it can make a nice decorative edging too. Yes, so ranunculus, all your changes unfortunately have to be made in the beginning. So now we're going to go into the sequence of seaming. There is a guideline for that. You just can't start willy-nilly sewing up seams. We always start with shoulder seams first when it's a traditional style sweater knit from the bottom up. That way you've got the back and the front held together. And then step number 2 would be to pick up stitches and do your neckband before you sew the sleeves in. The reason for that is just common sense. It gets too heavy on your lap when you have the sleeves attached. So try to do the neckband, if at all possible, before you sew in your sleeves. And then I like to sew up my side seams part of the way before I do the neckband. I just like the sweater to be held together so it's not too floppy and too open. But for most of these drop shoulder sweaters, you really don't know how far to sew your side seams until you fit in the sleeve. So I usually sew up about 4 to 6 inches, leave a nice long end attached, and then I can go back to that later. So after you've done your neckband, the next step will be to find the center of your sleeve. So we do that by folding the sleeve in half. Now I've got somebody's sweater here in for finishing, so I have not done any seams yet. So basically what I've done is I've pinched together with little clips the shoulders, and I've lined up the shoulder shapings. They all have to match, of course, when you're sewing. We always do our seams on the right side of the work using the popular mattress seam stitch. You can find that on YouTube. It makes a very professional finish, and it's easier to match up patterns. I mean, if you're matching up the leaf motif here, or if you had some ferrule or stripes to match up, then the mattress seam really does the best job. So I have pinched together the shoulders here, just to demonstrate. That would be my first seam here, and then I would sew up a little bit of the side seam. This one has a defined armhole, which we call a set-in sleeve, so I would be safe to sew right up to the underarm there. But on these 3 sweaters, you don't really know where your defined armhole is until the sleeve goes in. So then I would take my sleeve and I would fold it in half across the top, give it a little stretch, and then I would put a marker halfway through. That marker then has to line up with your shoulder seam. And you'll start working your seam downwards, not upwards, because again, you don't know really where the natural armhole will be. So we're going to sew from the top down and then the top down on the opposite side. And in relation to where it should end, if you could just put some pins in along the edge, that will tell you exactly where you should end as you're sewing. And of course, the other side has to match. And then the final seam will be to fill in the gap, to sew up the side seam to the bottom of the underarm, and then sew along the underarm of the sleeve. And then you sew in your ends. Oh, good question, Elizabeth. I was just going to mention blocking. Elizabeth is asking, should you block option number 2 before sewing together? Well, there's a great debate about that in the world of knitting. You'll find that some knitting patterns ask you to block the pieces first before you seam them. I never do that. I was taught that we block afterwards because, common sense again, once you have created a seam this bulky or even bulkier in the chunky weight, you want to be able to press and block that down too. So if you're blocking the pieces first and then sewing it together, you have these seams which are unblocked. So I prefer to do it as the final step. So I would sew together all the pieces. My neckband is done. I've sewn in all my ends, and then I'll mention how we do our blocking. Generally, we use a good wool wash. We use the Eucalan wool wash. We've used that here for over 25 years. It's a Canadian product, and it is entirely safe for hand knits. It's all natural. So we would soak the garment in a basin with room temperature water for about 20 minutes. You only need about a capful of the wool wash. It doesn't take much. And basically you want to squeeze the suds through the garment so that it can be absorbed, and then let it sit for 20 minutes. Come back, squeeze out as much of the liquid as you can. You're not going to rinse it. You're just squeezing out the liquid and the suds. And then you should have a dry bath towel standing by. You put your garment in there like a sausage roll. Roll up the towel and then squeeze that towel as much as possible, because that will really absorb all that moisture that you're not able to wring out with your own 2 hands. And remember, the thicker the sweater, the more it's absorbing. So you really need to get the excess water out so that you can block it. So I would have a dry towel standing by. I would put the garment straight out on the towel, arms straight out, and I would just kind of hand block it. Just kind of push it into position so that there's no wrinkles. And if I want to shape it, if I want the bottom a bit straighter and boxier, I can stretch that out. And if I want a bit more width, I can stretch it out, or a bit more length. And that way you can just let it dry overnight. Go back in the morning, turn it over, let the air get to the opposite side, maybe a new dry towel, and repeat once or twice. So that's really the best way to block it. Years ago, steam irons were very popular. We would take a wet tea towel and we would steam the garment, but that really has gone by the wayside. It does, the heat from the steam iron does damage the fibers, so it's not as safe as it used to be. I would say stick with the wet blocking method and you'll never have a disaster. And then of course every time you wash the sweater you can use the wool wash to wash it. So blocking is very important. This type of sweater does not need a lot of blocking. I would say, to be honest, I did not use the wool wash. I did not soak it. I used a wet towel over top of it because the yarn knits up so smooth and the texture is not pulling, there's no cables, there's no ferrule, no stranding, so it's very smooth on top. So all I did is put the sweater straight out, a wet towel, double layer over the entire sweater, leave it overnight, and it's really the wet towel that's pressing it like an iron would, but in a safer manner. This one I did soak in the Eucalan because I really wanted the lace work to be a little bit more pronounced, and I was able to stretch it and manipulate it with my hands while it was wet, and then leave it on a dry towel. It took probably about 3 days to dry this one. If you're able to put it outside on a day like today, it'll dry a lot quicker. And then PJ pullover, I really just did the wet towel method over top because again, the fabric is so smooth, there's no detail, no texture, and I just needed to press down the seams, and that was it. So you have two choices there. You can really choose either one, and yeah, I don't think you'll go wrong with that. Do we have any questions? No, I think everyone's outside today. Sandy and I cannot wait to get outside. So what we'll do is go over our trivia for this week. We have a trivia question, and the winner of the trivia question at the end of this segment will have an incentive ballot into the Sweater Weather draw bucket. We're going to have a live draw next week, 3 o'clock on Friday. And anyone who signed up for our Sweater Weather Knit-Along received one entry ballot. And then if you were lucky enough to win one of the incentive ballots during week 1, 2, 3, then you have an extra draw ballot in there. This is what you are vying for. A lovely gift basket, beautiful natural yarn in a lilac color, misty lilac, with a suggested cardigan pattern and a few little extras in there. So we're going to have a lucky winner to announce next week. What is blocking? Hi, Annette. Well, blocking is just the final step to give your sweater or your hat, any type of knitted garment, crochet garment, to give it a professional finish, to give it a nice smooth look, because generally when you're working on an item, it can look a little bit uneven, lumpy, bumpy, depending on, you know, what sort of stitch pattern you're following. Cables need a lot of blocking because they tend to pull in, and you want to be able to flatten them out and give it a nice smooth finish. Lace work usually has to be blocked so that it shows up, it just shows up the pattern work without sort of closing in on itself. And sometimes we're blocking so that we can get the fit that we want. If we've knit something a little bit too tight, we can block it to increase the sizing in the width or in the length. And it just gives it a really nice smooth finish, just like that. So yes, blocking is really suggested. Most of your knitting patterns, crochet patterns will mention that at the very end. Yeah, I highly suggest it. Some people get away with it and they never block anything, but generally you can tell when they're wearing something, and if it looks a little bumpy and uneven, they did not block it. So this week our trivia is all about sweaters. Some of you probably have been wondering, I always wondered, where does the word sweater originate? Well, it actually comes from a term that was created in the 1500s as a meaning for someone who worked hard. So if they were sweating and working hard, they were called a sweater. Makes perfect sense to me. It then resurfaced in the 1820s as a name for a garment that would induce sweating in an effort to lose weight. So I guess people were actually wearing something that was extra hot and bulky because they thought that that would help them to lose weight. Later in the 1880s, American rowing teams used the word sweater to describe dark blue jerseys that they wore to warm up in after events. Sweaters then became part of fashion in 1926. At the Paris Fashion House, the first sweater was part of a runway collection, and that fashion house was called La Banne. In 1935, Lana Turner became the sweater girl, and that is when the tight sweater became the fad, which continued until World War II. Since then, sweaters have been reincarnated as fluffy, sloppy, preppy, beaded, bulky, textured, and patterned. but throughout the decades they have always remained a cherished best friend. So our trivia question this week is, so Sandy is standing by, I should mention, so we want the first correct answer, and that person will win an incentive ballot. Last week we have to apologize because we had a tie between two of our knit-alongers who both answered the question correctly, but for some reason on Facebook we get a bit of a time delay in the real-time comment. So we had two winners, there was a tie, and two of you have incentive ballots in the draw bucket. So our trivia question today is, what is the term for sweater in England and Australia? We call these sweaters in North America and some other areas of the world, but in England and Australia they have a different name for what I'm wearing and what you're all knitting on for the last few weeks. And we are standing by waiting for, we have a winning answer?
We do.
Yay! That was quick, really quick. It must be an easy question.
There are three very quick, but the first one to come through.
Oh, we had a few correct answers. That's great.
Everybody's getting this.
I think it's really fun to learn a bit of the background about some of these words that we take for granted.
So the first one that showed up.
Okay, so according to our real live comments, Debra Woods was the first to correctly answer with jumper. So jumper is the term that they use in England and Australia to describe a pullover or a sweater. I think in North America we think of jumper as something that we would have worn to school, sleeveless, and we would wear it over top of a blouse or a shirt. So it's interesting to know, the different terms around the world. So, do we have any more questions? No?
No, but
Okay.
we have a lot of smart knitters out there.
We have a lot of smart knitters, yes, we knew that. If you knit, you're smart. Okay, so that's it for us today. Hope you enjoyed this segment of Sweater Weather Knit Along. And please don't miss next week, Friday at 3 p.m. Cheer on whoever may become the winner of the gift basket. And enjoy your weekend, everybody, and continue working on your projects. Thanks for watching.